Net gain, networking, encouragement, training, helping Snow Landscape and all small businesses hire, train, retain, and engage the best teams to build those win-win workplaces. Are you looking to thrive at work? Here is your net gain. This episode of Net Gain is sponsored by Wolf America, wheel loaders engineered specifically for the snow contractor. Wolf America machines are developed with real-world input from snow professionals who depend on their equipment during long, demanding storms. If you're considering a new loader for your fleet, reach out to Aaron and Harry at Wolf America or visit wolfamerica.com. Wolf America Loaders, tried and true by snow pros who have been in the middle of the fight. Welcome to Net Gain. This is Networking Encouragement Training. I'm your host, Evan Tashwire from Jack of All People Trades. We exist to help Snow Landscape and all small businesses hire, train, retain, and engage the best teams so you can build those win-win workplaces. As always, we're sponsored by Wolf America Loaders, so make sure y'all check them out. I'm excited to have Lindsey Best from EXT on here today. We're going to be talking about onboarding and what a lot of companies get wrong and how you can do it well and set yourself apart. But as always with Net Gain, I like to start with the encouragement. That's what the E in Net Gain is for. So the opening encouragement is I encourage you this week just to find ways you can be more welcoming at work, because being welcome opens doors. And I think most people, if they're genuine hearted, don't want to be unwelcoming. But sometimes with the busyness of the day, the fires we have going on, we can find ourselves maybe short on a conversation, maybe feeling like, they should know that already. But what is one way you can be a little bit more welcoming, even if it's just walking around the office, saying hi, asking how people's days are going, and genuinely meaning it? Maybe it's reaching out to someone you haven't talked to in a while just to send an encouragement, not because you want anything, not because you're trying to make something happen. Just commenting on a LinkedIn post saying, hey, this is great. You're doing this. I appreciate it. So being welcome, because being welcoming also builds that trust bucket, which especially with onboarding, you're going to need solid trust to get started. So I'm going to kick it over to Lindsey to introduce herself and kind of share her background related to the snow and landscape industry and what she's doing currently.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. First of all, before I even get into anything about me, I love your encouragement. Creating that welcoming environment, and you're right, just walking by someone and saying hi. Sometimes we're kind of in our own zone. You get to the shop and you're focused on, what you need to do or what you need to get prepared for the day, and you walk right by somebody. So I love that. That's an awesome goal to kind of have. So yeah, for me, my background is in landscaping and in snow. I've been in the industry for 14, 15 years, just over that. I started in the horticulture program at Algonquin College. And from there, I, worked at a greenhouse and a couple other places. I landed at a company called Hanson Lawn and Garden, and I worked there for a good number of years, 12 or 13 years, and I loved it. I loved our team. I loved everything about it. We were a design, build, maintain company, and we also did snow. And I did a lot of estimating and sales, and then I got into project management, and then I was the general manager before leaving there to go to EXT, which is the current company that I work with. And EXT is a software company for the landscape and snow industry that supports their operations, their client communication. It's a very big platform. So if you're interested and you want to find out more about that, feel free to reach out. But I've also taught out Algonquin in the horticulture program. I teach the Fusion Landscape Professional Certification course. So I kind of have a lot of different things going on. But yeah, that's kind of how I got started in the industry.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate you sharing that background. And that's, definitely a wide breadth. I'm going to take, before we dive to onboarding, I'm a little bit of a tangenter sometimes. That's why I keep
Yeah.
my notes to come back. But you did mention about teaching in the program at Algonquin. So what have you kind of found from the snow and landscape industry with people that you've taught? What kind of knowledge are they really, and this is kind of a personal just interest for me as a trainer and teacher, what kind of knowledge are they really seeking that they're maybe not getting on the job, and how can companies maybe help support that better?
That's a great question. The horticulture program, and most people know now, is being cut from Algonquin.
Mm,
Prior to it being cut, though, there was a big focus on the summer season and everything that comes into that. Of course, it's the horticulture program, so there isn't a big focus on snow, and the students do really lose that component, unfortunately, of what to do in the off season unless you have a teacher who has been involved in the industry, and that's the snow industry as well as the summer industry, who can pull that information in. The only other place that they might get that is in a design course, because in a design course, you have to think of all these things. And you don't want to
mm.
put a specific type of tree in the way of a snowblower. And so these kind of aspects come into that, but outside of that, so they kind of miss that. And I think that as the students were going through it, it's a little bit of a struggle for them because just again, there's no advocate. Like any industry, any service, any business, they need advocates for that service, that whatever it might be. And yeah, so unless there's someone there who can advocate for that, it becomes a little bit of a gap. But the GROW program, which is offered by Landscape Ontario, they do a great job at integrating snow into the program. And it definitely depends on the time of year for what the focus is of the GROW program, because it's very hands-on and it's very physical of what they're doing. But they always have a component of snow, which I love about the program because it really shows somebody that it's a 4-season career, which is really important in our industry.
Yeah, I like that focus of 4-season career. And I'll just say this and kind of get back on onboarding before I go way off the path because I already threw one curveball question. So before she thinks like, did he just bring me here to discuss something else? No, I didn't. I'm just my brain
That's
gets
fine.
going
I'm a
and we
tangenter too. I
we
got
get
you.
we get on good stuff because you are dropping good stuff, and of course the educator had to follow that. But I would say with the 4-season career and encouragement that I would drop with that is I think that's something to think about as a whole in the industry and also even collaboratively how we can support, because I know there's some that are landscapers or design. A lot of landscapers do snow, but not all do. Not all pavement companies or roofing, other outdoor companies do winter work or maybe cut back to a smaller winter profile. So how can we support? Because there is more need for labor in the snow. There's more need for operators in the winter, seasonal site leaders in the winter, sidewalk crews. So how do we support that and kind of balance that work a little bit collaboratively so that we can all win? And how can we think for seasons? So I think I won't open that because I realize that could be a whole other podcast episode in and of itself. But, you brought up a
For
good
sure.
thought. So kind
I
of getting
do.
on.
Can I,
Yeah, go
but
ahead.
can
Yeah.
I, yeah, just to
Shoot,
add
shoot.
on to that, because you're
Since
right. Like that's,
since I opened the door, yes.
um, but one thing that I think could be done really well, and I'm not sure how, like I'm not an expert in that field, but I think that one thing that could be really good, if you could find a partnership with a company that doesn't provide snow, who has employees that maybe still want to work in the winter time, then that could potentially be a good collaboration where they come over for the winter, they do winter work with that company, and then they go back to the company that they were coming from. I think that if you could find a good partner for that, that might be something just to help boost that. Sometimes companies need a few extra employees in the winter time. So yeah,
Absolutely. And I do know some companies I've heard do that. So I think that's good game and a good takeaway. I'm always about, the T in that gain is training. So a takeaway, if you're listening, is definitely if you're doing winter work, start those partnerships, like reach out and build with other companies that maybe ask if they do winter work. And if they don't, are they willing to do like an employee exchange program or partnership so that, while they have to lay their people off in the winter, you have some kind of agreement that this is what they're going to come do, or you can at least pick up some hours here. And then, you agree they go back on a certain date. So again, a lot of that's relationship based too. So that's one of those things that you can't call somebody on November 15th and be like, hey, can you send your people over for snow? I mean, they might, but you're probably
yeah,
better to have that relationship beforehand and understanding, because you want to make sure it's an understanding that, hey, we're not trying to poach, you have agreements in
yeah,
place that way. And also for the summer businesses too that don't do winter, I'd encourage you. That's where you have to have a strong employee value proposition where people are trying to leave you. You know what I mean? Because I would say if you're worried that somebody's going to poach, and then maybe your need is to look internally a little bit and say, do I have the strongest employee value proposition and retention in place that people are wanting to stay with me? Because I feel like in good companies I've been at, we could do something like that if the seasonal thing would apply. And I wouldn't worry about losing people because I would know that, hey, we're supplementing, but we know we're building the career here with them. So, with that, a
Yeah.
part of this strong employee value proposition is onboarding. And just want to kind of get into what's your experience with onboarding. And then, as a second part, what do a lot of companies get wrong when it comes to onboarding from what you've seen?
Yeah, so I think that in terms of my own experience with onboarding, I very much, while I was working with a landscaping company, I developed our onboarding process and helped refine that process over time. So, from the even when I was hired on, it was like, okay, how, not at that time, I was thinking, how can we make this better? But over time, I realized, okay, how can we make our onboarding process better? Because you become more involved in the company and that kind of thing. So, I've I helped create and form that system at the landscaping company that I was working for. And then, again, there's always things that you can refine along the way. You're never going to make a system and it's perfect all the time. I do believe in making sure that you review and update if needed at different times. So there's that. I think that I think sometimes with companies, and I can't, speak for all companies, but I do think sometimes with companies, you hire someone on and you kind of throw them into the fire and think, okay, they're going to figure it out. And that's not always the best way to do it. Sometimes you have to in the snow season. Sometimes it's like, yeah, you know, listen, it snowed. You got hired the other day. We can't go all through all the things that we normally would, but you need to go out there and we need to get this snow system done, and then I'll check back in with you. And we can go through some of these other things and just make sure that they have the essentials. So I think also a lot of companies don't have a process. They think that they have a process, but they don't really have a process and it's not written down. So they're not necessarily following the same steps every time. So while one employee might have a really great experience being onboarded, another employee did not get that same experience. So I think just making sure that that's one of the biggest things, is making sure that you have it written down, you have a checklist that you're going through.
Yeah, really good couple takeaways you threw out there. And this is always the fun challenge of how I do this is I try to teach on the fly based on what my guests say. And I don't know what you're going to say. So, but it never fails that subject matter experts like you always have good stuff that can be applied and taken away. And a couple good ones you dropped is number one, the process. Like you said, have a consistent checklist. I always say have beforehand, like what needs to happen before they arrive so that you arrive, because it does put a bad taste in your mouth. And actually, before I get to the takeaways, I'm going to share this stat and kind of put it in a mindset, because I think your takeaways this stat informs why your takeaways are so valuable. Is, different studies have shown different time frames, but generally between the first 30 to 180 days, employees are still kind of interviewing you as a company and really deciding, do they want to build a future with you long term, or are they looking after that 90 days to 6 months of, I got to start looking somewhere else. So, you have to think about it as a client. Like if you had a client that you knew you had to deliver on super well, and that they were like, look, if this isn't right, we're signing somewhere else. So you either nail it or we're out the door. You as a company would be doing everything you can. You'd have checklists, you'd have double checks, you'd be checking in, you'd be communicating heavily, because if we don't do that, they're out the door. But yet we have employees, oftentimes good employees, come in and we're just kind of winging it, like you said. We don't have a process. So knowing that, your best talent could be deciding within that first 90 to 180 days that there's greener grass otherwise, or if you're doing it right, they could be deciding, yeah, this is the spot I want to be. I don't want to work anywhere else. Like I'm committed here. I want to be part of this. So I think that gets back to the takeaways you shared. Number one, process of what has to happen beforehand, what needs to be in place, because even little things like they show up, their PPE is not there, or you're running around the first day, oh shoot, we have to get you this, or they get in the field and you realize, everyone else has trimmers, for example, for landscape. And it's like, oh, they don't have one, or everybody else is logging stuff in an app. Oh, they didn't get the app downloaded, or their app's not working. It wasn't tested, or they didn't have access to this field. Like those are all things you can check off, like you said beforehand. And then having what you train on, 30, 60, 90 days. I always recommend having feedback along the way. I say feedback's like playing the game with a cheat code.
Yeah.
It does take extra time and diligence to get into it, but if you actually respond to it and act on it when you can, and even if you can't and you let people know the why behind that, you're going to get so much further as a company. So I think, like you said, having that process, refining it through feedback, and then I would say one other takeaway you dropped, which I thought was really good, was snow and answers an objection of, even if it is a middle of a fire. I mean, I've hired, if you listen to my episode with Corey Grace, who I used to work with, we talked about one time where we had multiple no answers the phone in a storm. Somebody actually, I was fully staffed, and then somebody called me midway and said, this weather's too bad, I'm going home. So I was a machine short. I had somebody apply at Indeed at like 2 a.m. that I called at about 5 a.m. when that happened, and he went out. So you talk about like no time
Yeah.
for onboarding. That was literally and I don't advise that as the first course of action
Yeah.
by
Here's
any
your working
means,
interview. Yeah.
but it was like, that was certainly the no time for onboarding. But I think even if you have that, if it's like, storm that day or storm in 2 days, at least check back in, like take that
Oh,
extra
yeah, for
time,
sure.
even if it's just on the job site, even if it's just pulling them, even if it's calling them like, hey, I'm gonna let you get some sleep, I want to give you a call and just kind of see how it went. I know
And
we
then
threw
you
you in.
start that process. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Just like you're saying, you want to bring them back to the process that you have and go through those check boxes of things that you have. So, because winter is definitely a lot trickier. If there are a few things that I could recommend to people or would say, is that when you hire someone, after you hire someone, that's your first impression. That's like, hey, let's go on a date. Okay, now I'm going to make you an offer. Have a contract for them to sign. If you don't have an employee contract, it's something to look into and work towards. And actually, if anybody is looking for some help or advice at that, not that we're lawyers or anything like that, which I would always recommend just having someone look at it. If you go into ext.tech, that's our website, there's a hub there. And in that hub, if you sign up, there's resources in there, and one of them is an employee contract. And so it just has a lot of like interesting things that you can get in there. But once they go through that, and a lot of companies will also do safety training videos, signing papers, whatever the case may be, before the actual first day. But when you go to schedule that first day for the person, do not make it at 7 a.m. when everybody else is starting. Make it and this is summer, winter's a little bit different, but make it at 9 o'clock when the supervisor or manager can receive that person, so that the guy, person, girl, whoever shows up at the yard, the shop, and they're not looking around aimlessly in a sea of faces that they don't know, and they don't know who they're looking for, to try to figure their way out. And then from there, have an orientation. Where do they go to get things? Do they have a locker? Have they signed into the app that they need to? This is how you time in. And you go through all of these things. Realistically, it's about two hours, maybe 3 hours of going through basically an orientation with them. And then at that point, you've either decided that the crew is coming back to pick them up so that they can have basically a half day or finish off the day with the crew and going through other on-site type of things, or they come back in the next day and they get received by that person. Okay, here's the crew you're going with. And so they know what's actually happening, instead of them having to try to figure it out before they've even joined your team, really. So that's one thing that I would really recommend to companies, if they don't do that now, to look at it that way. And I know we're all pressed for billable time and that kind of thing, but like you said, this is how, when we get somebody in and we want to have a long-term relationship with them, we want to take the time to really make sure that they know what's going on and they know what to expect and where to go and all that kind of stuff. So, and on your topic of checking in, at the end of their first day, check in with them. How did today go? At the end of their first week, check in with them. Hey, how'd this week go? How'd you like? See any properties that kind of stood out? Like whatever. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It's a check-in to so that they know that you're actually paying attention to what's happening with them at the end of 1 month and at the end of 3 months. Those are kind of your top checking kind of points. And lastly, and I shouldn't say lastly, there's probably other things I can think of, but one thing that I also wanted to mention to people is to have a welcome package. Have something it's a checklist of things that you give to an employee. It's your company's mission and values. It's the expectations for the company. It's the managers of the company so that they know who to go through for different things. It's, hey, if you have a issue, you go to this person. If you need an extra shirt, you go to this person. If a tool breaks, you go to this person. And so they have it, it's written down, they can go through that. But also more than that, if you're able in the welcome package, and this can potentially be cost prohibitive for some people. But if it's possible, think about, a cooler, like a small cooler bag, a water bottle with your brand on it. So like your company name with the water bottle or whatever the case may be, and have these things that you just give them on their first day and that they can go through.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of good takeaways you dropped there. I like the one about the first day, especially for the field positions, and really for any position, but especially for ones that like come in for opening egress, opening roll call, to not come in that first day at that 7 a.m. or whatever time you meet up for morning stretch and egress, but meet the supervisor a little later one on one so they can get an idea, and then they also can prep them that yeah, day two you are going to come at this time and here's what you're going to expect. The team's going to be here. You'll see me. Here's who else you can see. So, like you said, it lessens that overwhelm because one thing you have to remember about new hires is, and I don't want to stereotype with this, but generally there's always kind of a deer in the headlights look because, starting a new job is scary. Let's face facts. Even myself, as somebody who's about employment, engagement, very extroverted, I still remember the last few jobs I started, there was still a little, am I in the right meeting? Am I handling this right? Who is this person? How are they perceiving me? So you're always a little bit on edge. So anything you can do to take that edge off really helps. I like what you said too about the checking in first day, first week. One stat I dropped: those who follow me, who have sat in trainings with me, can probably quote this with me, but so if you are ready, 70% of the variance in employee engagement is determined by, say it with me, the direct manager. But that's a Gallup stat that they share. So I share that to share with what you said about checking in that first day, checking in that first week. Actually, research backs that that is very effective because that does boost that engagement because it shows that, my manager cares about my concerns. It also lets them clarify expectations, make sure they have what they need, which are both foundational drivers of employee engagement. So it checks a lot of boxes in that way. Just checking in like that. And then the welcome packet, I like that idea too of, not only the swag, especially useful stuff like water bottles in a field, I think are very, and those
Yeah.
are things that can be a good investment because obviously you're working in landscape, you're out in the field or even in snow, you're in a loader for long hours, you need, to keep hydrated. Having that can be a good investment to encourage them. Hey, keep this filled. Let's stay hydrated. Let's make sure we take care of each other. And then obviously,
Mhm.
like you said, the list of, go to these people. And I would say as a pro tip to add to that, which can be, you might even been thinking of this in your onboarding schedule, is like have times where they actually meet them and see where they sit, how they prefer to be contacted. If you're
Mhm.
reaching out with the payroll information, like do you need to provide, an employee ID? Do you need to, send something in? Like whatever it is, whatever that person needs to make the communication easy, like let them meet them and learn that a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. A couple of things that you can also add within your welcome package, but also, and I would just say this even like on a safety board, is resources that you have within your company, but also resources outside of your company. So life happens. We all experience life in different ways. So there's a lot of free helplines that maybe people don't know or they don't know how to find. Putting those on like a resource list to provide to employees so that they have somewhere to go if they need to is always helpful. And then, of course, if you do provide healthcare, anything else that would be a resource, again, within your company, putting it down there so they just know where to go or where to see that kind of information as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think making it digestible and also with outreach and stuff, I know that's something that I feel like has been talked about more over the years with like mental health outreach. I mean, 988 suicide or crisis hotline is always a good one, and not just if you're in absolute crisis, but even if you're just having a rough day and having like hey, I need to talk down, I'm dealing with a lot of stress, like no shame in reaching out for help. So I think that's a good
100%.
message in general and has been shared more. And like you said, benefits, if you have an employee assistance program, whatever that is, definitely putting that out there. So, um, any kind of tips you'd say? I'll hit it for snow since we're getting into, we'll be releasing this in later August. So we're kind of getting right into the snow recruiting season and snow onboarding. Any tips for onboarding seasonal employees? One thing, I hear in my work is, well, it's tough to find people. There's so many variables with, they might get called back to a job. They might, be unemployed for a while. They might not be as committed when it actually shows up. Is it really worth putting all this work in for onboarding? So, let's start that conversation on seasonal snow onboarding. How do we do that well?
Yeah, it's a good question because it's difficult and everybody knows that it's difficult. So there's almost like, okay, we know it's difficult. Let's put that on the side and let's just get after it. So before the winter season starts, if you can start hiring earlier in the fall season and get people on for the fall to go into the winter season, that's always best case scenario because you're more likely to be able to get them into your company culture and kind of wrap them up in that and be able to have them stay on throughout the winter. During the winter can be a little bit more difficult because you're trying to fill spaces when there might not be a snow system that happens for a week,
Mhm.
right? And so it's this is a maybe a difficult thing to say, but in some instances, if you can overhire, that's almost a little bit better to do and then potentially do shift work in overlapping and that kind of thing. There's some depending on how what services your company actually provides, commercial versus residential, all that kind of stuff. There's kind of different ways you can work that. Generally speaking, though, you could hire four people and only one of them is going to show up on that next snow shift. So, in terms of actually hiring, sometimes, and it's a little bit of a not great kind of component, but over hiring can sometimes work well for you because you already know statistically, if you hire four people, maybe one or two of them is going to show up. So that's kind of like I think something that really goes unsaid in the snow industry about overhiring. In terms of having employees that are already there, though, there's a lot of different like programs that you can help support them through the winter when there's not a lot of snow. When there's a lot of snow, it's different because they're clocking a lot of hours and that type of thing. So yeah, it's I mean, I don't have any great miracle solution for that type of thing.
Yeah, and nor would I expect you to, because just for context of my experience, I know we met at SIMA and we kind of talked, but just to kind of set, which probably would have been helpful earlier in the conversation too. But I've been on several industries on the people side, HR, recruiting, talent development, onboarding. So my experience in snow, I had been in a payroll and benefits job at a bank, was not going well, just was kind of hit a career low actually at that point, was just trying to get back on the people side of HR. So a snow company was looking for a recruiter. They were looking to do more self-performed snow, and their HR manager, that wasn't her strong. She was very strong on payroll, compliance, benefits, which we were a great team for that because I wasn't good at that kind of stuff. So she didn't like doing the recruiting. I didn't like doing that. So we worked together perfectly. But I share that to share that, from recruiting, then as with a small company, if you're good at something, you get to do more stuff. So I got to do training for the seasonal team, both designing, delivering the classroom piece, working with the field team to design and help them deliver their piece, hiring all the seasonal self-perform, and then really tracking. I was actually dispatching. So I was pretty involved in the operation from that side, which was good because it gave me that opportunity to really learn it, grow it, see it firsthand, see who does and doesn't show up when you actually give those calls, so that kind of helped me too when I was recruiting. Because it's one thing to recruit and like all you're doing is recruiting, but when you actually are then calling and then I'm kind of seeing, okay, did I convey the expectation right? Like I'll share one example was I had somebody that, we called, had 24/7 availability, called him out for a storm. He's like, I'm not available. And I'm like, well, you said you were 24/7. So when I reported it back to my field manager, I'm like, hey, I need you to talk to him about this. Like, this was an expectation he'd be there. And his response was, well, I'm 24/7 available when I'm not working. And he had to explain to him, he's like, that's not what 24/7 available means. 24/7 available means if I call you at any time, you're going to go. If you're working, then you need to say, hey, I'm 24/7 in the evenings, or I'm available after 4. Then, but during the day, if I usually work these times, because we need to know for planning. So it was good for me to be involved that way because I kind of learned how to better my language, better convey expectations. But what I say all that to say, what you say about there's no miracle fix, I 1,000% agree. And I think it's
Yeah.
just like, I almost look at this like, I use sport metaphor a lot, especially as a football fan. It's funny. I was just joking with a friend of mine. It's recorded on the day of the Hall of Fame game, the NFL kickoff. And a friend of mine shared a graphic. And I said, are we really that hard up for football that we're going to watch Carson Beck versus Kenny Pickett tonight? I'm like, yes, we are. So I just had to throw that joke in there. And he's like, he responded, he's like, you darn Skippy, we are, Ev. I'm like, all right. But why I share that is I think football is a great metaphor for snow because it's, you think about football, no matter how much you plan, you still got to go out and execute against another team. So against another force. And no matter how well you have planned, that other force is still going to hit you in the mouth. It's still going to hit you with things you're not expecting with.
Yeah.
You're going to have to adjust on the fly. You think about teams that every huddle, they're like, okay, we got to switch up. They're doing this. Or the coaches are looking at it from 10,000 feet and saying, hey guys, every time you do this, they're going here. Like, you got to make sure you have somebody in that gap. So you always are looking at data. You're looking at it from 10,000 feet. You have the captains on the field, just like in the storm. You have the, snow field, the field leaders, the field supervisors, site leads who are like, hey, it's coming heavy here. They're opening in 4 hours. Guys, we need to get off of splitting up and getting everything to just focusing on this area because we got to get this clear. So I think just like you have to make those constant adjustments in football on the fly and look at it from a lot of perspectives, you have to do that in snow. So I think with
Yeah.
that, I say that to say I acknowledge all the challenges, and I think it's just, but just like football, just because you have those challenges, what you don't do is just say, oh, well, whatever, it's going to be chaos. We'll kind of go out there and figure it out. Like the best teams watch. I mean, I'm from Pittsburgh, so I do not like Tom Brady as a player. He wrecked the Steelers more times than I'd like to count in my life and ruined a lot of games for me. But that being said, as a professional, like I respect his work ethic. I respect
Yes.
how much he watched tape and how much he was like, I watch tape until he's like, my goal is to watch tape until I know that defense better than they know themselves. Like I see
Yeah.
them move and I'm like, I know where you're going. And I think that level of preparation, I look at it this way. I always say if they're doing that to win a trophy and money, like with snow, you're providing life-saving, infrastructure opening, first responders for the first responders. We should be working on this stuff at that high level, both for and both from a in the field perspective, but also I think a lot of organizations miss the 10,000-foot perspective of the recruiter or manager that's back looking at the data, looking at the whole game plan, because they're so in the field. So I think everything you said about definitely hire earlier, over hire, absolutely, because things are going to
Yeah.
happen no matter how well you communicate, no matter what incentives you offer, realistically, nobody, I want to say nobody, but most people are not in the place to be able to offer salary replacing for people just to sit on call. You know what I mean? They're
Yeah.
going to get paid when they work. Sure, you might have some, I know some have done like 4 hour guarantees when you get called out, but that's even still when there's some weather. So if there's no
Yeah.
weather for 2 weeks, there's a lot.
There are in terms of like once kind of somebody shows up. And before I get into that, I just want to touch on when you were talking about that 24/7 component. I think that if you some companies will discredit maybe an application if somebody already has a full-time job or they do another job. And I think that can be a little bit of a disservice to you as a company. It's good to know like, hey, you can only work during that time. Perfect. Then when we have a system and we're going out for that time, I'm going to call you. Or, hey, maybe we need to relieve someone and you come on board. So I think having those, like looking at that and shifts can really work to the benefit for companies. It is definitely a little bit of a different management that you have to work with it because you're not just calling everybody in at the same time. Also, too, I think there are a lot of different incentives that you can offer to employees, and it can be like, let's say, okay, for every day that you are on standby, there's X amount of dollars. It doesn't have to be a lot of dollars. It can be $10, it can be $20. And as long as you show up to the next shift, then you get like you showed up for this shift, then we had 10 days of standby and now you're coming in for this shift, okay, you get all the money for standby in between. That's a really good way to incentivize people to one, show up to a shift, but then come back for the next shift because they don't want to lose that standby pay that they have going on. So that's one, but there's a lot of different incentive type of programs that you can put into the winter that are standby pay bonuses at the end of the season, but you only get it if you actually stay till the end of the season. And so those are things that can really incentivize people to stay working once you get them in. I think too, just even thinking about sports and not that I'm a bit like I don't know a lot necessarily about sports, though I enjoy them, but the best teams are destination teams. Players and athletes are looking to get on those teams. So make your company a destination place to be where people want to actually go to your company to get hired. And that means even just bumping up your social media game because how many landscapers follow other landscapers, including employees and companies? So if you can increase your social media, and this does not have to be anything polished. It's you're shooting something in the field and you're showing employees working or you're whatever the case may be that you're showing, it's 2 posts a week. Schedule it in your calendar so that you can put something up. And I've seen some very creative post, when we think about hiring, we think, okay, let's just go to Indeed and throw up a post and put all of our expectations and what we really want to see. And it's very like formal. Get a little creative, get a little fun with your post that you're putting out. And one of the best ones that I had ever seen it was a picture of a guy with a frozen beard. And I don't remember exactly what it said, but like, if you're okay with your beard being frozen, this is the place for you. Apply. Right. And it was just such like a creative way to attract people to the post itself. So don't be afraid to, go outside of the really formal Indeed job posting that you're putting out there, like, and stay as best as you can, stay consistent with your socials posts, especially on Instagram where people get, it's landscapers following landscapers a lot of the time because, when somebody starts looking for another job for whatever the reason that may be, then maybe you'll come up in some of those recollections for those people.
Yeah, 100%. I think you dropped a lot of good knowledge there. And, the one thing I would say before I kind of comment on the specific takeaways is the overall encouragement I would give is, with this being challenging, seasonal snow recruiting and retention, always have the positive mindset of, you know, no matter what, we're going to find a positive way through. Like, don't get caught in the, nobody ever stay. I hear I don't want to say whining because I empathize with it, but I hear oh, nobody ever stays, or, when you recommend things, I've heard the in conversations, oh, we did that and people still left. Like, look, yeah, you're going to do things and people are still going to leave. But
Yes.
the focus is, how do you try and track things? And I think the one takeaway I had, which I was going to mention, is, I think it's really big with recruiting. And this is why I think companies need to have more people, especially as you grow self-performing snow, dedicated to recruiting, not just for the recruiting, because recruiting is not just post. If all you're doing is posting jobs and doing interviews, that's like recruiting, like not even 101. That's like recruiting 50, in college
Yeah.
course terms. Like, real
Yeah.
recruiting is passive candidate outreach, on Indeed and other sources. Real recruiting is getting into the community and building relationships. Real recruiting is, like you said, social media and working with a media team and putting that out there and showing equipment. The one thing for snow I've noticed, I'm sure landscape similar, like snow guys like to watch other snow guys and girls run equipment. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They like to see, oh, that Razorback, that looks slick. I see
Yeah.
you running that Arctic, that looked, that shot was fire. Like, people love that kind of stuff and they eat it
Yeah.
up. And, even if it's just a video of, like, I've seen just montages of equipment running, and people love that stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely use that for your advantage, and, have that consistency. But it does take people being, and I'm not saying you have to dedicate, depending on size of company, 100% of a human resource to it, but start small. Where can you start dedicating part of a resource, whether it's a manager taking a little bit of time out of a field for a half day to do it, whether it's an admin who does billing, can they add a little bit on if they're looking to grow their career? Is it, the person answering the phones can also have a checklist of things? And then obviously, as you build and you need somebody more dedicated to it, you can build. But I say all that to say, too, we talked about earlier, feedback, tracking metrics. This is one thing I found personally as a recruiter doing self-perform snow. And we grew from, I was recruiting for about 750,000 my first year, to, I was in the industry for 3 years. My third year, we were up to about, and that was just in Pittsburgh, we were up to about 3.2 million in 3 cities and 2 states. So we had
Wow.
Harrisburg and Jersey as well. And with that, I found metrics were absolutely huge, because what metrics allowed me to do was see, out of how many people I reached out to passively, how many of them actually applied. Out of those who applied, how many interviewed, how many that I phone interviewed showed up to run the equipment in person. There was usually a little bit of a fall off there, which I was okay with, because I'm like, if you're not going to show up as a follow up to a phone call to run the equipment in the summer, do I trust that you're going to answer my call at 2 in the morning in the middle of winter when you want to stay in bed? Probably not. So I was
Yeah.
okay with that fall off. But then what it would really let you track down to the end, just like you, it was almost kind of, I took the concept of a sales scorecard, of like outreach to say, to meetings, to sales, to, renewals and all that, and just kind of flipped it for recruiting. But it allowed me to see, out of people that worked, and we would actually rate our operators too. So I could see, out of like my A-level operators, how many came from referrals, how many came from Indeed, how many came from, if we did a booth at like a county fair, how many came from that? Because then that lets you see as a company, because I get where companies always say, well, if I'm doing all this stuff and I'm investing this money and time, am I actually getting an ROI? Which is 100% a good question to ask. But
Yeah.
tracking those metrics and reporting back lets you see where you're getting your ROI. So, like in our case, it was referrals. So I'm like, all right, let's beef up the referral bonus. Let's, have some more events in the off season where we do cookouts, and tell them, invite your friends, like invite people to
Yeah.
come in and meet the team. So,
And
just any
if
kind of
that,
thoughts
just
on that?
even on that too, in terms of your referrals and yeah, just because I don't want to forget the thought, if somebody in your company refers somebody else, have a kickback for that person who gave the referral. Have
100.
some kind of guideline that is set up. It's an incentive program where if somebody refers and that employee comes on and they stay for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever that needs to be for you, that other employee gets a kickback.
Yeah, 100%. And I would say, for companies listening, if that's something your company wants to develop, I've developed that. So I would be happy to have that conversation with you, as far as tangibly what that looks like, and putting the right guardrails around it to make sure. Because with any incentives, you want to make sure, I'm sure you'd probably agree with, you want to make sure you're incentivizing the right behavior. I think
Yes.
the classic wrong incentive example is always, the sales commission of just new sales, because then you get people that go out and are like, oh, I sold, $4 million of new business, and operations is over here like, bugging their eyes out, like, how in the world we can't cover that. We don't have the resources, So did you truly incentivize the right things versus if you
Yeah,
say like, okay, yes, there is an incentive, but for you to get it, it also requires us hitting these operations metrics. So then you go back to ops and are like, hey, look, I want to sell this, but what do we need to have it? Like, are we ready to do it today? Would you need to go to our owner and talk about more equipment? Like, how would it work? You know what I mean? And then work together and collaborate. So I say all that to say you want to incentivize the right thing. So I think
for
that's
sure.
important. Anything else you wanted to share? I know, we were at my last point, which we kind of got into before I even asked you about it officially, was practical tips for improving onboarding, which you dropped a lot of and we talked a lot about. But any kind of notes you had or tips for onboarding you didn't get to share?
Well, one thing that I would say is that, because we did touch on a lot of different things. But what I would encourage and challenge everybody who listens to this is go back and review whatever process you have in place right now for onboarding and refine it. Even if you
Mm-hmm.
think you have the best one, if it's, I mean, basic, if it's not written down, write it down. Then go and ask your managers or the people who are actually onboarding these people and say, hey, what do you think of the process? Do you think that we're missing something? Then go to at least the last three people that you have hired and ask them how their experience was onboarding into your company, because you will get a lot more information and ways to improve your system based on hearing it from other people than you just coming up with what you think is great. And I'm not saying that what you come up with won't be great, but you can get a lot of insight from maybe missing gaps or things in the process of what you're doing now that you could improve on. So that's just one thing that I wanted to add in there as well, in terms of just reviewing and updating onboarding processes, and check it, have checkpoints. Once you create, you're like, hey, this is a bombshell onboarding process. Okay, now every year or a few times a year, check the onboarding process, check in with people, make sure everything is still running smoothly and that you're still doing all the things you said you were going to do.
Absolutely. So I think that's probably a great one to close on. And I probably 1,000% will clip this for social because I think it's a great three-part process. It's easy to process. Number one, write down your onboarding process if it isn't wrote down already. Number two, go back to your managers and ask them for feedback, once it's wrote down or on what you have wrote down. If even if it is wrote down, what's working well, where could we improve? What's your understanding? How comfortable are you executing this? And then number three, talk to your last three hires about onboarding, even show them the process. Here's what we're trying to execute. What went well, what didn't, and let them look at it and be like, yeah, I didn't have X, Y, and Z, or this went really well. This example that the manager shared, because the thing is, I know a lot of times we talk about this from improvement, but one thing I think is important with feedback, and I say this with employee engagement too, you want to also capture what you're doing well and continue doing it. I always say with learning,
Yes,
it's what's one thing you're going to start, stop, or continue doing. And if you're excelling,
100.
don't underestimate the continue, because the continue is a strength, and a strength, when it's continually built on, is going to have exponential growth. So Lindsey, any final words before we sign off? I just want to say I appreciate you being on, and I really appreciate this conversation.
Yeah, you know what? I love that we got the opportunity to meet at SIMA, and it was really great. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast with you. I've really enjoyed my time here. So, and if there's anything that I can help with in the future, anybody listening, that type of thing, I'm happy to do so. You can reach me at Lindsey, it's Lindsey at ext.tech, TECH.
Awesome. Well, this has been Lindsey Best from EXT, Evan Tashwire from Jack of All People Trades. Again, this has been Net Gain, sponsored by Wolf America Loaders. We exist to help snow, landscape, and all small businesses hire, train, retain, and engage the best teams so you can build those win-win workplaces. Thank y'all for listening. We're out. Today's episode of Net Gain is sponsored by Wolf America, wheel loaders engineered specifically for the snow contractor. The team at Wolf America does more than just sell loaders. They operate them in their commercial snow removal fleet, so they understand what contractors need when the snow is falling. The hours are long and downtime is not an option. Wolf America loaders offer fast travel speeds, excellent visibility, comfortable cabs, and universal skid steer attachments, compatibility for the pushers, plows, buckets, and other attachments your crews already use. They're built to be productive throughout the winter and versatile enough to keep earning their place in your fleet during the off season. Whether you're planning to add one wheel loader or a dozen loaders before the next winter, now is the time to start the conversation. Reach out directly to Aaron and Harry at Wolf America to discuss your operation, fleet pricing, delivery timing, or visit wolfamerica.com.
With no weather, but you ain't gon' slip and fall with that. Why? Cause we snow fighters, we assaulting that. Yeah, they assaulting that. King me, this salting rap. Clown brokers, end of the road. This a cul-de-sac.